People think learning is some kind of magical talent. They look at mathematicians or investors and assume we were born with some special switch flipped on. But here's the truth, and it's something I learned early, long before Renaissance, long before the markets. Your mind can be trained just like a muscle. And if you understand how to train it, you can learn pretty much anything you want. Let me show you how I did it. Most people recoil the moment something feels confusing, as if confusion itself is proof that they're not capable, not smart enough, or not meant for whatever they're trying to learn. But the truth is almost the opposite. Confusion is the doorway. It's the signal your brain gives you when it's stretching, when it's encountering something just beyond its current map of understanding. Leaning toward that feeling instead of away from it is one of the most powerful habits you can build if you want your mind to grow. When you step closer to a difficult concept rather than retreating, you're telling your brain, this is important, pay attention, build new pathways, and it does. It begins making connections, forming new patterns, and filling in gaps you didn't even know existed. That single shift in attitude, treating confusion as an invitation, changes your entire relationship with learning. Think about how children explore the world. They poke, press, shake, bite, test everything they don't understand. Confusion doesn't scare them because they haven't learned to judge themselves for not knowing. It's only later that people start labeling confusion as failure. But if you want to keep expanding your mind throughout life, you have to return to that original posture of curiosity. When you hit something that feels too complicated, instead of saying, I don't get this, say, why does this feel confusing? That simple question pulls you back into the process. Your brain stops freezing and starts investigating. Confusion becomes a puzzle instead of a wall. When I was learning mathematics as a kid, I wasn't good because I instantly understood everything. I was good because the parts I didn't understand annoyed me. A theorem didn't make sense. I needed to know why. A proof felt messy. I kept staring at it until it clicked. The confusion wasn't a reason to quit. It was a magnet pulling me in. And over time, something interesting happens when you approach learning this way. Your threshold for difficulty rises. What once felt impossible now feels manageable. Your brain becomes familiar with discomfort, and eventually it begins to enjoy the tension of wrestling with the unknown. Most people never learn this skill because they run from the feeling of not knowing. The moment they hit a concept that stretches them, they back off just enough to stay comfortable. But in doing that, they never give their brain the chance to grow new structure. They stay inside the limits of what they already understand, and nothing changes. If you want to learn anything deeply, math, business, languages, creative skills, you have to retrain your instinct. When confusion shows up, you move toward it, you sit with it, you examine it, you ask what part of it feels unclear. And your brain, instead of shutting down, gears up. It's also important to realize that confusion is temporary. It may feel dense or frustrating, but it's not a permanent state. Your brain is actively reorganizing information in the background. Every minute you spend working through something difficult is like laying down the wiring for a new skill or insight. Once that wiring is built, things that used to confuse you suddenly feel obvious. And because you leaned in instead of backed away, your mind becomes faster at handling complexity the next time it appears. This mindset doesn't just apply to intellectual challenges. It works in every part of life. Whenever you encounter something unfamiliar, new technologies, new responsibilities, new ideas, embracing confusion gives you an advantage over those who avoid it. You become someone whose mind adapts quickly, someone who doesn't get intimidated by what they don't yet know. You become more resilient, more flexible, more capable of navigating uncertainty without losing momentum. Most people think learning is about talent or intelligence, but in reality, it works much more like building strength in a gym. If you lift only what feels easy, your muscles stay exactly the same. If you want them to grow, you have to pick up something slightly heavier than what you're comfortable with, something that makes your body say, "Whoa, this is new." Your mind responds to challenge in the exact same way. When you expose it to material that stretches your current abilities, it doesn't shut down unless you train it to shut down. What it really wants to do is adapt. It rewires itself, strengthens connections, creates new ones, and slowly reshapes how it processes information. But this only happens when you increase the difficulty of what you feed it bit by bit, just like raising the weight on a barbell by small increments instead of jumping straight to something extreme. What people often misunderstand is that the key to learning is not intensity, but progressive challenge. If you jump into something wildly above your level, you'll get overwhelmed and frustrated. But if you always stay in the shallow end, you never build any real cognitive strength. The sweet spot is that slightly uncomfortable zone right between I get this and I'm lost. When you consistently work there, your mind becomes more capable day after day without you even noticing the transformation until you look back and realize that something once confusing now feels simple. That feeling isn't magic, it's the result of repeated exposure to manageable difficulty that slowly pushes your limits outward. Think about anyone who becomes great at something. They didn't binge learn an entire field in a week. They started with something just beyond what they could fully grasp. They wrestled with it, practiced, made mistakes, got a little better, and then tackled the next slightly harder layer. Over time, these incremental challenges compound into deep expertise. This approach works whether you're learning mathematics, coding, languages, investing, or even creative skills like writing or music. The principle is universal because the brain is universal in how it grows through strain, adaptation, and repetition. The goal is not to crush yourself with impossible tasks, but to deliberately choose material that forces your mind to stretch just enough that it has to work for the answer. Another important piece of this is mental endurance. When you lift weights, your body learns to tolerate the burn, the fatigue, the effort. In learning, the burn is confusion, frustration, and the feeling that you're not getting it fast enough. Most people interpret that mental burn as a sign to quit or switch to something easier. But if you treat that sensation as part of the process rather than a red flag, your mind adapts. You become more comfortable sitting in ambiguity, more patient with the time it takes to understand complex ideas, and more confident in your ability to eventually figure things out. Over time, the threshold of what feels hard rises. Challenges that once intimidated you now feel routine because your mind has grown stronger through repeated exposure. Consistency matters just as much as difficulty. You can't go to the gym once a month and expect results, and you can't learn deeply by studying something only when you feel inspired. Progress comes from showing up regularly and applying steady, deliberate pressure on your mind. Even short sessions matter if you do them consistently. The brain likes rhythm. The more often you revisit challenging material, even in small doses, the faster it adapts because it remains engaged with the process instead of resetting every time you take long breaks. You don't need marathon sessions. You need regular reps, each one adding up, each one nudging your abilities forward. And the most empowering part is that this approach works regardless of age, background, or past experience. Your brain remains capable of growth for as long as you keep challenging it. You're not locked into whatever level you're at now. You can always get sharper faster and more capable if you're willing to pick up that next slightly heavier mental weight and give your mind something new to grow from. Curiosity is the spark that gets you moving, but without structure it burns out quickly. You've probably experienced that rush of excitement when you first dive into a new topic, a new skill, or a new idea. In the beginning, everything feels interesting, fresh, full of potential. But curiosity alone can fade the moment things get complicated. That's where structure becomes essential. Structure is what takes that initial excitement and turns it into real progress. Without it, you jump around, skim the surface, get inspired, and then stall the moment you hit the first wall. With it, you create a path your mind can follow, something that guides you even when motivation fluctuates. When I talk about structure, I don't mean rigid rules or strict schedules. I mean having a clear way of approaching what you want to learn. Curiosity opens the door, but structure keeps you walking through it. It might be as simple as deciding to explore one question at a time instead of trying to swallow the entire subject all at once. When you focus on one question, one concept, one small challenge, your brain knows where to direct its energy. It doesn't get overwhelmed by the big picture. Instead, it moves step by step, building a stable foundation. That's why some people learn faster. They're not smarter. They're simply more organized in how they chase their curiosity. Another part of structure is developing habits that support learning. Curiosity tends to come in waves, but habits create consistency. If you show up regularly, even for short periods, your brain stays engaged with the material. Structure gives curiosity a rhythm, a place to return to, and a way to keep building even on days when your energy is low. You might spend 10 minutes reviewing something you learned yesterday or tackling a small section of a bigger problem. Those small, structured moments accumulate. Your brain starts recognizing patterns, filling in gaps, and connecting ideas because you've created a system that allows it to do so. Structure also helps reduce frustration. When you rely on curiosity alone, you jump from idea to idea without much direction. The moment something stops being easy or exciting, it's tempting to quit. But when you approach learning with a structured mindset, difficulty becomes part of the plan instead of a roadblock. You expect challenges. You know what step to take next, even when you're stuck. Maybe it's revisiting an earlier concept, breaking the problem into smaller pieces, or searching for a different angle. Structure gives you options. It gives you traction. It keeps you moving forward instead of spinning in place. There's also something powerful about setting boundaries for your curiosity. If you try to learn everything at once, you end up learning nothing deeply. Structure narrows your focus just enough so your curiosity can actually accomplish something. It helps your brain work efficiently. You might be endlessly fascinated by a subject, but true understanding comes from digging into specific questions, following them logically, and connecting them with what you already know. Without structure, curiosity is scattered. With structure, it becomes a laser-focused, deliberate, and capable of carving out real insight. And the beautiful part is that structure doesn't kill curiosity. It actually protects it. When your learning is organized, curiosity lasts longer. You stay engaged because you see progress. You understand more, you make connections that excite you, you start feeling that satisfying momentum where each new insight makes you want to explore further. Curiosity gives you the desire to begin, but structure gives you the ability to continue. Together, they create a powerful cycle where interest fuels progress and progress fuels even deeper interest, turning learning into something sustainable, enjoyable, and far more effective than relying on raw enthusiasm alone. When you look at a big problem all at once, your brain naturally reacts with a kind of mental overload. You see everything you don't understand, all the steps you haven't taken yet, and all the complexity bundled into one intimidating mass. That feeling can make anyone freeze. It's not that the problem is impossible, it's that your brain doesn't know where to start. But the moment you break that problem into smaller pieces, everything changes. The mind stops panicking and starts processing. You give it something it can actually hold on to, something it can chew on, and suddenly the situation feels less overwhelming. Big problems are just collections of small problems disguised as something monstrous, and once you break them apart, the path forward becomes clearer than you expect. When you isolate what you don't understand, you turn confusion into something specific. Instead of "I don't get any of this," you shift to "I don't get this part." That small shift rewires your thinking. You're not staring into a fog anymore. You're focusing on one shape inside the fog, and the mind can handle one shape. Once you make that first piece make sense, you move to the next. It becomes a sequence of manageable challenges instead of one gigantic mystery. This is how mathematicians solve proofs, how programmers debug code, how entrepreneurs tackle new projects, and how anyone learns anything that initially feels too big. Our brains are not designed to absorb entire systems in one go. They're designed to build understanding one piece at a time. Imagine trying to learn a new language by memorizing the entire dictionary before forming a single sentence. Ridiculous. Yet people approach skills and problems like this all the time. They want the full understanding first, but real comprehension grows from focusing on small, clear blocks that stack into something larger. When you shrink the problem, you're not dumbing it down. You're giving your brain the right size bites so it can digest the information fully. Another important part of breaking things down is that it keeps you moving forward. Progress is addictive. When a problem feels massive, you hesitate, procrastinate, or convince yourself it's too hard. But if you take one tiny step, like understanding one definition, one concept, one paragraph, or one equation, that little achievement gives you momentum. It proves to your mind that movement is possible. It builds confidence, which is one of the most important ingredients in learning something difficult. Big leaps rarely happen. Small steps taken consistently create the big leaps without you even noticing. Breaking down problems also reveals the parts that matter most. Sometimes a challenge feels confusing not because it's genuinely difficult, but because you're looking at too many elements at once. Once you separate those elements, you quickly see that only a few of them are truly essential. The noise falls away, and what's left is something much simpler than what you started with. This not only makes learning easier, it makes thinking clearer. You get better at spotting patterns, understanding relationships, and identifying what actually needs your attention. Before long, you start applying this instinct everywhere, in work, conversations, planning, decision-making, and you realize your thinking has become sharper because you've trained it to simplify complexity without losing substance. And the best part is that this approach works no matter how advanced the problem is. The smartest people in the world use it constantly. They don't try to swallow complexity whole. They dissect it, question it, rearrange it, and then rebuild it from smaller pieces. That's why they understand things so deeply. They've learned how to slow the problem down. When you adopt this habit, you stop being intimidated by learning new things. You become the kind of person who tackles big ideas calmly, methodically, and effectively. Instead of seeing a giant wall, you see bricks. Instead of seeing chaos, you see parts that can be ordered. And that ability to break any challenge into digestible pieces is what makes the complicated become simple and the impossible become doable. One of the most misunderstood parts of learning is the power of stepping away. People think progress only happens when you're actively grinding, eyes locked on the problem, pushing harder and harder until something finally clicks. But the mind doesn't work like that. Some of the most important breakthroughs happen when you aren't forcing anything at all. When you walk away from the desk, take a shower, go for a stroll, or do something completely unrelated, your brain doesn't just shut off. It keeps working quietly in the background, sorting through information, connecting dots, and resolving confusion without your conscious effort. That's why you can stare at a problem for an hour and get nowhere, then have the answer pop into your mind while you're making coffee. Giving your brain space is not weakness, it's strategy. When you're stuck, your conscious mind tends to loop over the same ideas again and again. It fixates, it tightens, it creates mental tension that blocks new insights from forming. Stepping away breaks that loop. You interrupt the pattern, release the pressure, and allow your subconscious to take over. The subconscious has access to all your experiences, memories, and intuitive associations. It's faster, more flexible, and not limited by the narrow tunnel your conscious attention often creates. When you give it time to breathe, it can reorganize the puzzle pieces in ways you never could through sheer force. This is why some of the greatest thinkers, scientists, and creators have emphasized rest, wandering, and mental downtime. They understood that thinking isn't just what happens on the surface. It's a deep process that continues even when you're not aware of it. When you step away, you're not abandoning the problem, you're handing it to a different, more powerful part of your mind. And that part often produces results when you least expect them. Many people treat learning as a race, and in doing so, they exhaust themselves. They think the longer they stare at something, the faster they'll understand it. But overload shuts down comprehension. When your brain is tired, confused, or tense, every new piece of information gets tangled. Nothing sticks. Nothing connects. This is why a short break can feel like hitting a reset button. You come back clearer, calmer, and more capable of seeing what you missed before. The information hasn't changed, your mental lens has. Suddenly, the problem that felt impossible now feels approachable, simply because your mind had time to reorganize itself behind the scenes. This process also teaches you that learning is not purely about effort, it's about timing. You absorb some things instantly, but others need to marinate. They need hours or days to settle into place. You might not notice this happening, but it's working. Every time you read something, practice something, or attempt something, you're planting seeds. And like any seed, it grows when you're not watching. Accepting this makes you more patient. Instead of beating yourself up for not understanding something immediately, you trust the process. You allow your mind to work at its own pace, knowing that clarity often arrives gradually or unexpectedly, not on command. Stepping away also makes learning more sustainable. Instead of burning out or becoming frustrated, you build a natural rhythm of effort and rest. That rhythm strengthens your ability to return to a problem with curiosity instead of dread. You begin to see breaks as part of your toolkit, not as signs of laziness. And the more you practice this, the more often you'll experience that satisfying moment when an answer appears out of nowhere, as if your brain solved the puzzle on its own. In truth, it did. You just gave it the freedom to do so. People tend to overestimate the power of speed and underestimate the power of consistency. They think learning is about scorching through material, mastering things quickly, or picking up skills in big, dramatic moments of brilliance. But most real growth doesn't look anything like that. It's slow, steady, almost invisible day to day. You don't notice it happening because it doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives in tiny shifts, tiny improvements, tiny realizations that slowly stack together until one day you look back and realize you're operating on a level you couldn't even reach before. That kind of transformation doesn't require speed. It requires showing up over and over, even when you feel like nothing is happening. Especially when you feel like nothing is happening, think about how compound interest works. You don't see the magic in the first few deposits. The change is microscopic, almost unnoticeable. But give it time, give it consistency, and the small amounts accumulate into something significant. The same principle applies to learning. Every page you read, every problem you attempt, every small insight you gain is like adding one more drop into a bucket. At first, it looks empty, but eventually it fills. Eventually, it overflows. This is the type of progress people miss because they're too focused on immediate results instead of long-term accumulation. Consistency also builds stability. If you learn something quickly but don't revisit it, it fades. The brain forgets what it doesn't touch. But if you return to something repeatedly, even for short periods, the connections strengthen. They turn from fragile impressions into solid pathways. That's why consistency beats intensity. A single 8-hour study session won't give you the foundation that 20 minutes a day for a few months will create. The brain remembers patterns, and routine creates those patterns far more effectively than rare, exhausting efforts. This is how true understanding is built through daily reinforcement that quietly transforms temporary knowledge into lasting skill. Another reason consistency matters so much is because it builds trust with yourself. When you show up regularly, you teach your mind that you're reliable, that effort is part of your identity, not something you do only when it's convenient. That internal trust removes a lot of the mental resistance people feel when they try to learn something challenging. Instead of seeing learning as a battle, you start seeing it as a rhythm. Some days it feels easy, other days it feels slow. But either way you're moving, you're progressing. You stop judging yourself for not being fast enough and start appreciating the fact that you're showing up at all. People often quit because they assume slow progress means no progress. But the mind doesn't grow in a straight, predictable line. It grows in spikes. You might spend days or weeks feeling stuck, only to suddenly have something click that once felt confusing. Those click moments don't come from rushing. They come from the accumulation of small attempts that built the conditions for clarity. Without consistency, those breakthroughs never arrive. They're the reward you get for staying in the process long after the novelty wears off. Consistency also protects you from burnout. When you rely on speed and intensity, you drain yourself quickly. You push too hard, get overwhelmed, and then avoid the task entirely. But when you rely on steady repetition, you create a sustainable path. You don't need to sprint. You don't need to force major leaps. You make small movements that keep you engaged without exhausting you. Over time, those small movements add up to something extraordinary. And the beautiful part is that consistency is available to everyone. It doesn't require genius or special talent. It requires patience, commitment, and a willingness to do a little bit more today than you did yesterday. Slow learning is still learning. Slow progress is still progress. And as long as you keep moving, the results will come not in a single dramatic burst, but through the quiet power of showing up again and again until your mind becomes capable of things you once thought were far beyond your reach. Surrounding yourself with people who know more than you is one of the most powerful accelerators for learning, yet it's something many people resist. It's easy to feel intimidated or insecure when you're not the smartest person in the room, But that discomfort is actually the sign that you're in exactly the right place. When you spend time with people who think differently, who see things you don't, who understand concepts that still feel foreign to you, your mind naturally starts expanding. You get exposed to ideas you wouldn't encounter on your own, perspectives that challenge your assumptions, and levels of reasoning that push your boundaries. You absorb their way of thinking almost without realizing it, the same way you pick up an accent by living in a place long enough. Learning becomes faster, deeper, and more layered simply because your environment is doing part of the work for you. Most people limit their growth by surrounding themselves with those who already agree with them or operate at the same level. It feels comfortable, it feels validating, but comfort rarely creates progress. When everyone around you thinks like you, there's no friction, no challenge, no mental push that forces you to evolve. You stay exactly where you are, repeating the same thoughts, the same habits, the same interpretations. But when you're regularly engaging with people whose minds run faster or stretch wider, your brain is forced to adapt. It has to keep up, it has to sharpen, and that adaptation is what leads to real growth. The beauty of learning from people who know more than you is that it shortcuts years of trial and error. They've already gone through the confusion, the mistakes, the dead ends. When you watch how they approach a problem, how they break it down, how they question it, how they ignore the noise and go straight to the heart of the issue, you gain access to a level of efficiency that you might never discover alone. You start noticing what they pay attention to and what they dismiss. You start understanding how they filter information, how they connect ideas, and how they think several steps ahead. These patterns quietly become part of your own thinking, and over time you find yourself approaching challenges with more clarity and confidence than before. Another thing that happens when you surround yourself with brilliant people is that your standards rise. You become less satisfied with half-effort or sloppy thinking because you're constantly seeing what excellence looks like in real time. Their discipline rubs off on you. Their curiosity becomes contagious. Their intellectual habits become models you unconsciously imitate. And because you're observing these behaviors up close, they feel more achievable. Excellence doesn't seem distant or mysterious anymore. It becomes normal, expected, and possible for you too. This kind of environment also teaches humility, which is essential for learning. When you're always the most knowledgeable person in the room, it's easy to believe you've already reached some kind of peak. But when you consistently interact with people ahead of you, you're reminded of how much there is still to learn. That awareness doesn't weaken you, it fuels you. It keeps you hungry, it keeps you curious, it keeps you moving. Instead of protecting your ego, you start protecting your growth. You stop needing to prove yourself and start wanting to improve yourself. And perhaps the most overlooked benefit of surrounding yourself with smarter people is that it normalizes ambition. When you see others pushing boundaries, solving problems that once seemed impossible, or thinking at a higher level, it expands your sense of what's possible for your own mind. You begin to internalize the idea that difficulty isn't a barrier but a gateway. You start aiming higher because the people around you show you it can be done. Their achievements don't intimidate you anymore, they inspire you. In time, being around people who challenge you becomes one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. It keeps your mind alive, engaged, and constantly evolving. It turns learning into a shared journey instead of a lonely struggle. And it shows you that growth isn't something you chase by yourself. It's something that accelerates dramatically when you place yourself in an environment where excellence is the norm and curiosity is the language everyone speaks. Your brain is far more adaptable than most people realize. It's not a fixed system with preset limits. It's a living, changing network that constantly reshapes itself in response to what you expose it to. Every skill you practice, every idea you wrestle with, every challenge you take on sends a signal to your brain that says, we need to build something here. And the brain responds by strengthening certain neural pathways, creating new ones, and trimming away the ones you don't use. It's always adjusting itself based on the demands you place on it. If you consistently push it to think deeper, focus longer, and understand more, it will expand to match that demand. But if you avoid anything challenging, stay in your comfort zone, and let your mind coast, it adapts to that too. It becomes efficient at doing less, thinking less, understanding less. In other words, your brain becomes exactly what you train it to be. When people say someone is naturally smart, what they often mean is that the person has spent years engaging with difficult material until their brain became comfortable operating at that level. It wasn't magic. It wasn't destiny. It was repeated exposure. The brain gets good at whatever you ask it to do frequently. If you constantly challenge yourself with complex ideas, your mind learns to process complexity with less friction. If you push yourself to pay attention longer than feels comfortable, your attention span increases. If you force yourself to analyze deeply rather than skim, your analytical ability strengthens. The adaptation is slow and subtle, but it's always happening, whether you're aware of it or not. This is why it's so crucial to choose what you feed your mind with intention. When you spend most of your time consuming shallow, fragmented, low-effort content, your brain starts operating at that shallow level. It adapts to short bursts of stimulation instead of sustained thought. It becomes restless, distractible, impatient. But when you regularly challenge yourself with material that requires thinking, reflection, and engagement, your mind begins to settle into a deeper rhythm. It gets better at focusing, better at absorbing, better at connecting. You start noticing that what once felt difficult now feels almost natural, simply because your brain has grown into the challenge over time. One of the most empowering parts of understanding this is realizing that you don't need dramatic leaps to change your cognitive abilities. You don't need to suddenly understand advanced concepts or master a new field overnight. You just need to nudge your brain slightly past its comfort level regularly. Small stretches repeated consistently create big changes. You might read a page that feels dense, solve a problem that feels slightly above your level, or try to understand an idea that doesn't quite click yet. Each time you do this, you're strengthening your mental muscles. You're signaling to your brain that deeper thinking is required, and the brain responds by upgrading itself piece by piece. This adaptability also explains why people who challenge themselves early in life often continue to excel as they get older. They've built a brain that thrives on complexity, but it's never too late to start. The brain remains plastic, capable of growth and change throughout your entire lifespan. You can absolutely train it to become sharper, more creative, more analytical, more resilient at any age. The key is consistency and willingness to push just a little further than what feels easy. If you train your mind to stretch regularly, it will stretch. If you train it to avoid difficulty, it will shrink away from anything demanding. And the fascinating part is that once your brain adapts to a certain level of challenge, that level becomes your new baseline. What once felt hard becomes normal. What once felt confusing becomes clear. That's the power of mental adaptation. Your brain is always listening to how you use it. It's always responding. It's always remodeling itself in the direction you push it. And when you choose to push it toward growth, toward challenge, toward complexity, you unlock capacities you didn't even know you had, simply because you created the conditions for your mind to evolve into something stronger, sharper, and far more capable than before. Most people treat complexity like a warning sign, something that tells them they're not capable or that they've reached the limit of what they can understand. That reaction is natural, but it's also completely backward. Complexity isn't a barrier, it's a doorway. When something feels complicated, that feeling is simply your mind encountering information it hasn't organized yet. It's like walking into a messy room where everything is unfamiliar. Your instinct might be to walk right back out, but if you stay, look around, and take in the details bit by bit, the room becomes less intimidating. Complexity becomes clarity through exposure. But that only happens when you lean in instead of stepping away. Most people retreat the moment something stops being instantly understandable, and that retreat teaches the brain to panic at difficulty. It creates a feedback loop where every challenge feels threatening. But the moment you reverse that instinct even slightly, you teach your mind a completely different lesson. You teach it that complexity is not danger, it's opportunity. You show it that confusion can be examined, patterns can be uncovered, and effort leads to understanding. Your mind becomes calmer around difficult information because it starts associating difficulty with growth instead of frustration. Complexity is also the place where breakthroughs hide. Simple ideas are comfortable, but they rarely change you. They don't stretch you, they don't force you to think in new ways, they don't challenge your assumptions. The ideas that shape you the most are the ones that make you pause. The ones that make you think, I don't fully get this yet. That hesitation is the starting point of deeper thinking. When you go toward that feeling instead of away from it, you enter the space where deeper learning becomes possible. You begin noticing details you never saw before, connections you weren't aware of, layers that are easy to miss if you only skim the surface. Leaning into complexity doesn't mean you suddenly understand everything at once. It means you sit with the discomfort long enough for your brain to begin forming structure out of what once felt chaotic. It's like staring at abstract lines until the shape slowly emerges. And the more often you confront complexity, the faster that emergence happens. Your brain becomes familiar with the process. It stops expecting instant clarity and starts expecting gradual understanding. That shift alone makes learning dramatically easier because you're no longer fighting your own impatience. Another thing people overlook is that complexity looks intimidating from the outside, but often becomes surprisingly simple once you break it open. Many problems appear difficult because they contain several layers stacked on top of each other. When you approach them slowly, separating each layer, the challenge shrinks. What felt impossible becomes manageable. What felt messy becomes ordered. By leaning into complexity, you're not embracing chaos, you're choosing to organize it instead of avoiding it. Your mind gains the ability to simplify without oversimplifying, to dissect without destroying meaning. This approach also builds confidence in a way nothing else does. Every time you work through something complicated, you strengthen your belief in your ability to handle difficult material. You stop being intimidated by things you don't yet understand because you've proven to yourself that understanding arrives with effort, not instant talent. Confidence in learning does not come from knowing everything. It comes from being unafraid of not knowing. When you stop running from complexity, your mind becomes bolder. You become more curious, more patient, more willing to explore the edges of your knowledge. And something interesting happens once you make complexity your ally. The world becomes bigger, not smaller. Problems feel less threatening, ideas feel more accessible, learning becomes exciting rather than exhausting. You begin to crave the feeling of not knowing yet because you trust your ability to eventually unravel it. Complexity stops being a wall and becomes a signal, a sign that you're about to grow into a version of yourself who understands more than you did moments before. One of the most powerful overlooked truths about learning is that mastery doesn't come from collecting information. It comes from transforming information into experience. Anyone can read a book, watch a video, or listen to advice, but those things barely scratch the surface of true understanding. What actually changes your mind, what actually rewires your brain, is doing something with the information, trying it, testing it, shaping it, breaking it, rebuilding it, applying it in ways that force you to interact with it instead of just observe it. You learn far more from taking one idea and using it than you ever will from taking in 100 ideas and leaving them untouched. The moment you apply something, even imperfectly, you activate parts of your mind that would stay dormant if you only absorb knowledge passively. People often hold back from applying what they learn because they feel unprepared. They think they need more knowledge before they can start, more clarity, more confidence. But waiting to feel ready is the quickest way to stay stuck. You don't gain confidence first and then act. You act first, and confidence grows from the action. Application doesn't require mastery. It creates mastery. You don't need to know everything before you begin experimenting. In fact, the best learning happens when you try something before you feel fully equipped. You discover what works and what doesn't through direct experience. You uncover misunderstandings you never would have noticed from just thinking about the idea. You start seeing nuances that are invisible when everything remains theoretical. And the truth is, the brain remembers what it does far more strongly than what it hears or reads. When you apply an idea, your mind encodes it using multiple pathways: memory, emotion, motor processes, pattern recognition. You create mental hooks that make the idea stick. You build intuition around it. That's why someone who actually practices a skill, even inconsistently, will outperform someone who studies that skill in perfect detail but never uses it. Doing makes learning real. Doing makes learning permanent. Doing turns knowledge from a concept into a capability. Another powerful part of applying information is that it reveals your blind spots. When you take action, you quickly find out what you don't know yet. And this is incredibly valuable because blind spots don't show up during passive learning. They only appear when you engage with reality. This feedback, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes surprising, is what sharpens your understanding. It guides you to what truly needs improvement. Instead of guessing where you're weak, the experience shows you directly. And once you see those gaps, you can fill them with purpose instead of wandering aimlessly. Application also builds momentum. Every small action creates a sense of progress, even if the result isn't perfect. That feeling of movement sustains motivation. It fuels curiosity. It gives you a reason to keep going. The cycle becomes self-strengthening. You apply, you learn, you adjust, you improve, and with each cycle, the idea becomes more deeply embedded in your mind. This is how people who seem effortlessly intelligent actually operate. They don't wait for perfect understanding before acting, they learn while acting, and that continuous cycle compounds over time. And maybe the most important part is this: applying what you learn turns information into something personal. It stops being just knowledge and becomes a piece of who you are. You shape it through your actions, your mistakes, your insights, your experiences. You internalize it in a way that no teacher, book, or lecture could ever accomplish for you. When you do something with an idea, the idea becomes yours. You don't just understand it, you own it. You can wield it, adapt it, teach it, and build on it. The people who grow the fastest aren't those who know the most. They're the ones who use the most. They treat every new piece of information like raw material, something they can mold with their own hands, something they can put into motion. And over time, that simple habit turns ordinary learning into extraordinary mastery.